Today's episode of the Grind Hours podcast, a catastrophe in Major League Baseball episode of the Grind Hours podcast. I have a first time guest on the show. And July has been a first time guest month. This guy is a friend that I've met mutually through my girlfriend. He is one of the smartest people I know, one of the smartest people to talk about sports that I know. Robert, do you really want to add anything else before we get into this, or?
Oh, I don't think I can do much better than that. I've never been called the smartest person anyone knows. So, with that as the backdrop, I can only hope to live up to that expectation that you've just set for everyone listening.
So, right off top here, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's worth talking about the Joe Kelly incident in Houston last night where he threw at Bregman and then potentially threw again at Correa. He's had some history with being on the Red Sox and throwing at people. We threw at Tyler Austin, if you're a Yankee fan. Here we are with a guy who has a history of doing this. I think that's the reason why the Astros have reacted the way they did last night. Was Kelly has a reputation for, I'm going to throw at you, and I'm going to throw at you 3 times around your head. I'm not going to try to hit you in the backside or in the back and just move along with it. I'm going to try to end your career. And I don't appreciate that for anybody. He also acted like a 6-year-old child, a guy who's 32, who has a wife and a kid, to act like literally a 6-year-old. I don't like the lips and the jawing after the fact. Just walk back to the dugout. You did what you had to do. It's done. I can actually sympathize with the Astros here, and I'm extremely anti Joe Kelly. What about you, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be pretty violent for a Yankee fan such as yourself, or really for any Major League Baseball fan these days, to be sympathetic to the Houston Astros after all the scandal and the hostility that we saw in the offseason, which really demonstrates just how different things are today than they were back in March in so many ways. I watched a little bit of the video. I didn't see the game live. I'm just relieved in a sense to see that there's a game between the Astros and the Dodgers, so we can have that kind of that bitterness come to the surface once again. I think as sports fans, we kind of have been craving that display for quite some time. I mean, I will never, as a baseball fan, I'll never endorse someone throwing, a pitch at someone's vitals, right? I mean, I'm old-fashioned enough to appreciate that if you have an athlete who comes in hard at second base, you hit him on the rear,
right,
on the next at bat, and I would have been fine with him doing that, because even though this is 2 years removed from the situation, of course, this is still somewhat on the minds of baseball fans. But I was watching some of the video and I saw it was just pitch after pitch after pitch, so far inside. If I'm giving him the absurd benefit of the doubt and I say that, it was an accident, he did throw at least one off-speed pitch or something. I mean, this is kind of the issue that we've now come to accept, which is that Rob Manfred went on the record and said some time ago that there won't be any tolerance for throwing at batters this year, especially the Houston Astros, if I recall correctly.
Right. Yeah. And now it would be punishment.
Right. So now even a mistake or just being aggressive and pitching inside to make sure you're using that half of the plate, it might be construed as, an act of hostility. And, this is the problem is now as sports fans, we have to decide whether we thought this person's intent was to, like you mentioned, end this man's career, or whether he was just trying to get batters out. He did get out of the inning, and, I think they went on to win the game. It's just, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and I can't blame the Astros for being a little bit upset. It reminds me a little bit of the Manny Machado incident with, I think, the Red Sox a few years ago.
Yeah.
It was just like game after game, it was just headhunting out there, and I'm like, this is insane. You're gonna really, really hurt somebody.
It's not baseball anymore. And can I give Joe Kelly the benefit of the doubt? Yes, if it's just against Bregman and you had a little bit of loss of control. But if you're going to continue to throw inside and try to make a statement, trust me, I'm pro pitcher. I pitched, maybe not at a high level, but I did pitch. So I understand trying to get the inside corner on a right-handed batter. But when you do it that erratically and you don't have any command and you don't really know where the ball's going, I can't sympathize with you, especially if you jaw at Correa like you did after the inning. Everyone knows your intent there. You showed what your intent is there, and he's a clown. He's not even the first guy to do this. Somebody on the Royals over the weekend threw at Altuve and Bregman. So he's the second guy to do this. The other thing I don't understand, and I think that the reason why I'm so upset about this is I think he did it for selfish reasons. I think he wanted to say, "Hey, look at me, and I'm the guy." He wasn't a part of this rivalry with the Astros for the Dodgers. He
Right.
wasn't on both of the teams that cheated. I mean, he was on the Red Sox, but who's to say what happened there? We don't really know what happened with the 2018 Red Sox, but we know what happened with the 2017 Astros, and I think that's what the Dodgers are more upset about. He was not on that team. He was still on the Red Sox. He wasn't even a thought in the rivalry. I don't understand why he's the guy to do this. If it was Kenley Jansen or Walker Buehler or Kershaw or anybody else who has been on this team for some time, I can understand it. For Kelly, I can't, and that's unless you want to say anything else. I want to get off this because I don't really want to give this clown any more airtime because that's what he is. Joe Kelly's a clown. He's an attention seeker, and he's a child. Let's transition to something that should be in the forefront of every baseball fan's mind, even if you're not affected by what's going on with the outbreak in the Miami Marlins clubhouse. There were four teams this week that haven't played a game yet. The Yankees, the Phillies, the Marlins, and the Orioles. The Yankees and the Orioles will go tonight in Camden Yards, but this is something serious, and this was one of my biggest concerns as a fan of what happens if this happens when it starts. And it's happened, and it's taken four teams out of contention for a couple of days. The Phillies aren't going to play till Friday. The Marlins aren't playing until Monday. So I don't really know where to go from here. And it brings up the question: is this really worth it? Because you're putting a entire franchise at risk. You're putting a Philly clubhouse person in the visiting locker room. He got it from the Marlins. So
Mm.
when you're not doing a bubble like all the other sports are doing, this is a risk, even with limited travel. I
Yeah,
don't know how to contain it, and I don't know if you can. And again, is it really worth it to have a year or to have a season where we don't have COVID under control?
I mean, you're also correctly touching on the fact that these athletes are carriers for this just as ordinary civilians would be too. And there's kind of
Right.
like the moral question there where even though I think as a public we're really craving professional sports right now, it does make you wonder if Major League Baseball is being as responsible as it can be by just having the season. Now, I would think that these players are under strict supervision and they're being responsible as I would expect, any citizen to be. But it does make you wonder, and I mean, then there's the bigger question about what's going to happen to each team. I hope all the players are safe, of course. I mean, their health should be paramount, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen to the season. I mean, and it also kind of makes us perhaps even more frustrated as fans, knowing that Major League Baseball's stated its ambition to get the season in before the end of, I believe it was November, because they are still desiring the advertising dollars for the 2020 election, as was mentioned by the networks during all the negotiations. But because they waited so long to begin this 60 game stretch of a season, you now have this problem where if you have teams missing 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10 games, 3 series, let's just say, there's not a whole lot of room on the far end of the season to fill those games back in. And now
Right.
you're presented with a situation where you have the Miami Marlins, who are going to miss at least 6 games right now, and there's going to be 16 teams making the playoffs. So you're saying 2/3 of the teams are going to make the playoffs this year? I mean,
Right.
it's really mind-boggling, and it just continues to make me frustrated as a baseball fan.
The other thing is, you don't know when this is going to happen again, if it happens again. What happens if this happens during the playoffs? And there's no, you play game one and then you don't play game two for 2 weeks. What happens there? And I, there's so many logistical questions. And if you're a travel, like the head of the travel for a Major League Baseball team, you must be freaking out right now because if I'm the head of the Yankees travel, I'm not going from Washington to Philly, once I got word that the Marlins were quarantining, I would have headed straight back for New York. There was no way in hell I was staying in Philadelphia. And I don't know who's next up for the Phillies, but they should be scared because it still might be there. And I don't think that you can still play games until the Marlins play. I think the Phillies are out of it until the Marlins play too, because whoever the next team is that's going into that visiting locker room, they know for a fact that there was 13 people walking around that clubhouse who had COVID.
Right, and asking the question, is this the appropriate time to be having professional sports? And we're all feeling conflicted about the answer to that.
If I'm anybody in the sport right now, I'm walking on eggshells because I don't know if the season's going to be continued to be played, and I'm going to be extremely interested to hear what guys in the Yankees and the Phillies and the Marlins and the Orioles have to say about this experience of going to play a ball game and then not being able to play. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Feed Hudson Valley is a regional food rescue and harvesting network in the Hudson Valley operating through Dutchess, Orange, Ulster, Columbia, Greene, Putnam, and Sullivan counties. It links donors of prepared but unserved food and fresh produce with nonprofits and food assistant programs through an app-assisted network of food donors, volunteers, and feeding agencies. Feed Hudson Valley facilitates the harvesting, processing, and distribution of locally grown or produced agricultural products, self-stable food donations, and prepared nutritious foods. The app used is called Chow Match, and it is easy for volunteers to download and use. Among the donors are restaurants, farms, food makers, stores, hospitals, and universities. The food assistant programs include food pantries, soup kitchens, and shelters. Volunteers are matched through the Chow Match app when a donation is available. They can indicate that they are available to make a run and then pick it up for a donor and deliver it to the agency. The Feed Hudson Valley Network currently includes over 300 volunteers, 130 donors, and 95 receiving agencies. Last year, on average, Feed Hudson Valley rescued and redirected over 12,000 pounds of food each month. Feed Hudson Valley could use more donors and volunteers. To learn more and sign up, visit feedhv.org. Again, that's feedhv.org. One more time, spelled out, feedhv.org. Now back to the podcast. All right, to switch gears up and be a little bit more upbeat and positive, let's talk about, Robert, your team, the New York Mets, because they've gotten off to an interesting start, to say the least. And they've been on both ends of the spectrum in terms of gratifying wins with a Cespedes poetic justice 8th inning home run to win a game. They've been on the lopside of a Braves, what was it, 14-2 or whatever.
Oh, it was a rout. I have no idea. It was
Sunday night game.
Yeah.
And then 2 hard-fought games against the Red Sox in Boston. So their season has been up and down since the start of this. What's your gauge for your team through 5 games?
I think there are a lot of interesting little storylines to follow, like you've already touched on. For the first time in a long time that I can remember, I mean, this Mets team suddenly seems to have the starting rotation as a liability. That to me is what immediately jumps out when I look at the team. As a Mets fan, I love to see quality starting pitchers because for the last half dozen years, there's been just great arm after great arm that have mostly all come up through the organization or have been acquired through trades or off-season signings. And, now I'm looking at this rotation and I see Jacob deGrom, number 1, and a previously number 4, Steven Matz, who's now number 2. And then I see, Dr. Anthony Fauci, number 3. and I'm starting to wonder who's going to be the 4 and the 5. So I'm hoping that this offense can get going because, yesterday and the day before they started to really hit a little bit more, but you still haven't seen as much production out of Alonso that we'd like to see. And it's a short season. So 5 games, you're starting to see, an appreciable enough sample that you hope this isn't some kind of trend that's going to carry through the next 55 games. But I'm worried about this starting staff. I think this offense can really do an incredible damage to opposing pitchers. You see the young talent that they've still got. And as I mentioned, there's definitely some storylines to follow. I want to see how the Mets are going to deploy, one of my favorite players, Dominic Smith, who doesn't really fit on the field neatly into any position, but just has such promise offensively. I want to see how he's going to find his at bats. I would love to see, if Robinson Cano starts to get, colder, I want to see him sit. I want to see Cespedes get more days off so they can really leverage that designated hitter, which I'm otherwise not much of a fan of, but should be
I think it
useful for
works
this
to your
team with
advantage
this long
this
lineup.
year.
Absolutely. I mean, it does, but my National League stubbornness doesn't want me to admit it. But yeah, it does. I'd love to see it disappear and never come back. But
You have an American League lineup, though.
I know now we do, because you could see with Dominic Smith and J.D. Davis and Robinson Cano and Yoenis Cespedes. These are guys who either they don't fit neatly on the field in a specific position, or there's just a logjam at their position, and or they need days off because of their age or their proneness to injury. So, I mean, it's going to be an exciting stretch for this team. I think another point that probably doesn't get mentioned about this team is, I think because these guys are kind of young, and you could really see how they gravitated to the fan base, especially July and August last year. I'm a little worried that they're not going to have the same energy that they brought toward the end of last year, because they're not going to be charged up by the fan base. I mean, I can just say I was fortunate to go to the game last year. It might have been like August. I want to say it was like August 1st, or it might have been in mid-August, where Michael Conforto hit that walk-off home run, walk-off double to right field against Sean Doolittle against the Nationals. Crazy, crazy game where they were down in the ninth or in extras. And just seeing the liveliness of the fan base, there was like this feeling like, even though this team was several runs behind in extra innings, there's this feeling that like anything is possible with this group of guys. And they delivered in that moment, and they had a great rest of the season, even though they fell short of the playoffs. I'm just a little nervous that this team playing at home, where you can hear everything that goes on, you can hear a pin drop in the field.
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried they might not have the same kind of charisma that they played with last year. And I hope it doesn't reflect, I hope that's not reflected in their standings at the end of September.
I have 4 players and 4 storylines that I think are jumping off the page at me. One, Conforto seems like his old self, and he seems like the up-and-coming, young, promising left-handed bat that's a power hitter that you guys needed in the middle of your order, and I think that would pair well with Alonso. Number 2 is Cespedes, because for a guy who hasn't played in 2 years, to have his moment, of course he does, on the second day of the season. It would have been even better if it was opening day and he got DeGrom a win. But
I think it was opening day, but he didn't get the win. It was
opening day. That's right.
It was perfectly poetic, and it made me, as somebody who's been a Cespedes hater the last couple of years, and I think rightfully so. Even I was jumping out of my chair when I saw that.
You're right. It was opening day. It had shades of Dom Smith, who didn't play for 2 months, and
not too bad for back-to-back wins, right? I mean,
right. I mean, yeah. Hell, I mean, who else do you got that hasn't played in a very long time that could potentially get an at-bat and do something with it? But he could be, the fact that he's still coming up to the Lion King music, that I didn't even know that he did that until the start of this year, which the balls on you to come up to the Lion King music as to be the savior of this franchise. The cojones to do that is just otherworldly, especially all that you've been through over the past 2 years. But he's been a positive so far this year. You touched on it with Alonso, with his lack of production. And I kind of expect it from him, because the same thing happened with Judge at the beginning of his second year. After coming from a magical and historic rookie year, to have all that pressure put on you, and you're the new face of the franchise, you're the guy now, after being this guy who was talked about for years. For the Yankees, it was like 3 years. It was, wait till you see this guy who's hitting absolute bombs on the backfield. And Alonso was this sort of guy who led the league in minor league home runs the year before his rookie year. Then he came up and he absolutely mashed. He's got to have a little bit of a regression of the mean and a little bit of a slump, because guys do have tape on him now, and they've seen him. And especially when you're playing in division games, the amount of times that you see a team, they're going to figure you out. And he's got to make that next level adjustment to really be a superstar in this league. He had a really, really good year, a historic year. And I'm not saying he won't continue to have that, but he he's almost got it looks like he's pressing a little bit. It really does. It looks like there's a
Mm.
lot of weight on his shoulders and he's got to relax. He really has to just relax, let the game come to him, and then I think you'll see him be shades of his rookie self. But time will be seen on that. The fourth guy, and a guy that I want your opinion on before we take a quick break here, is Robinson Cano, a guy that I love. And Morgan gets on my case every single game that he doesn't do well. And like, why do you love this guy so much? And it's like I grew up with him. He became a star before my eyes, and I can't not love the guy. But he's
Mm.
really struggled. I think he's 1 for 12 or 1 for 13 since the start of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a guy who can't afford to slump because of guys like JD Davis and Jeff McNeil, who, if they continue to produce, are going to take his spot in the lineup and in the field. And there's only so many at bats to have at DH with Dom Smith and Cespedes, who I think are your two primary DHs. So
Mm-hmm.
you might be stuck with a situation where you got a guy getting 20 million bucks a year who has just fallen off the face of the earth, and that happens with guys. That time will do that to people. But I mean, personally, I hate to see it because I love him so much. What is your opinion on Cano and his sort of April struggles?
Yeah, it's going to be rough, and it was rough. It has been rough, and I think it's going to be rough. Keith Hernandez, who knows an awful lot more about hitting than I do, says his bat speed hasn't slowed down, and that's a promising sign, despite him being kind of an aging veteran on the field. To me, there's no question. I give Luis Rojas, new manager for the New York Mets, a little bit of credit for not. This is hard to even say because it seems so crazy for not hitting him third the first few games of the year like he was doing last year with under the leadership of Mickey Callaway. Um, you know, it's to me, like you just mentioned, it's only a matter of time until he's going to show himself not to be able to produce at the level that you recall seeing him growing up, and accurately so.
Well,
And
but
when
they
that
pay
happens,
that.
yeah, I
He's
mean, the
he's
problem is
paid
being
to be
paid
a
$20 million
all-star.
dollars. Right. The Mets onboarded this absurd contract. As I don't even want to get into Edwin Diaz, but they onboarded this absurd contract and gave away prospects in doing so. And look, I mean, I think you look at this lineup, and I'm not sure if Luis Guillorme is going to be the everyday second baseman if Robinson Cano starts to struggle. But what I would like to see is you move Jeff McNeil to second base because that's his most comfortable position, even though his defense has been a little compromised up till this point. You put Dominic Smith in left field. You let Yoenis Cespedes be the designated hitter like he basically has been. And then you put J.D. Davis, which I think is a controversial opinion, at third base. And you say, look, if you can play a reasonable third base, if you can go out there and not be a total liability at third base, you're the everyday third baseman. And Robinson Cano will have to be relegated to whatever Robinson Cano can do. It probably means coming off the bench more, and pinch hitting a little bit more. But I got to see what these guys can do. I mean, I can't understand not having J.D. Davis in the lineup every single day, not having Dominic Smith in the lineup every single day. You've seen that these guys can produce at a high level. And you're right
Yeah,
in saying that it's possible they might regress this year in what looks to be basically their second. I mean, Dominic Smith's had a few more years, but they're all coming off of successful seasons. So the mark has been set. But I just can't understand throwing Robinson Cano out there day after day after day.
I think his at bats are extremely numbered, and the day that you see that lineup that you're talking about, Smith and left, J.D. Davis at third, and McNeil at second base, I think you're going to see that a lot this year if Cano continues the trend that he's on, because I think that's their best lineup. I truly do. And for a guy that's producing that much like J.D. Davis is and Dom Smith and McNeil, you got to find them at bats, and the guys that aren't producing are going to be stuck backing them up. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's baseball. That's just the
Mm-hmm.
definition of baseball and of sports. But let's take one more quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk about some fan experience. All right, to end up the show, you and I are both passionate baseball fans, and to say that watching fans with cardboard cutouts is weird. I ask all the guests that I have on talking about baseball how they feel about the cutouts and the fan experience watching from home thus far. How do you like it?
I will start by just saying it is definitely different. The crowd noise that they're pumping into all the different home ballparks is a little bit unsettling at times because it's on a delay and it doesn't feel as natural. I will say there are some things that are interesting that now that you can basically hear a pin drop at every moment of the game, I would have never in a million years expected this. But J.D. Davis went yard last night, Oppo, and his home run hit the right field foul pole at Fenway.
Hmm.
And I was watching the highlights and I didn't even catch this, but the sound of that ball striking the foul pole, it was like the clap of thunder. I mean, it was really incredible, and I would encourage your viewers to just check out the highlights to last night's game if they haven't had a chance to do so, because it really was like, whoa, like you don't expect that tiny ball that's hit, 335 feet to right field to be making that kind of sound when it strikes the
Right.
metal
I
pole. It's
mean,
just you.
it's for me, it's so alien, and I hate the crowd noise. The I watched a game, a Cub game, and that's just literally it's like playing baseball on Mars to not have fans at Wrigley. That's
Really.
the ballpark to me that I think needs fans, and it's just why even play games if you're not going to have fans there because the fans are an integral part of what I think about with Wrigley. But I kind of like the Mets dog section that they got out in right field with Conforto's two dogs and McNeil's dog.
McNeil's dog.
Like I kind of that's kind of fun to me. And the the thing with Chipper Jones
Oh.
over opening day weekend, which I mean, if you Chipper Jones is so obsessed with torturing Mets fans, it's almost sad at this point. You've went the extra mile by naming your son Shea because you loved hitting at Shea Stadium. You don't need to put your you and your son a cardboard cutout on the third baseline. Like at some point, it's the Mets are living rent free in your head, and it's almost flipped on you that it's more funny that you're this obsessed with doing it than it is you actually thinking that it works for Mets fans. And maybe it does for some Met fans, and you're just like, I can't, like, Larry, get out of here, just go and enjoy your retirement. But like, come on, like, I don't know. That's me as a non-Met fan.
I think you're dead on. It was a little comical. I mean, I appreciate the guys at SNY for picking that up and putting it on the telecast on opening day. I got a chuckle out of that. I will say my hatred for Chipper Jones, it still pales in comparison to my hatred for Chase Utley. So the day that I see a Chase Utley cardboard cutout, I think you'll win me over on that viewpoint. But as long as I'm seeing good old Chip, Larry and his son Shay at Citi Field, I'll continue laughing. I think that's funny, and he probably paid good money to have his face over there. So I'll take his money for the team.
I mean, he can afford it, but I mean, it's still like why pay the $89 or whatever the heck it is? Save your money and just I don't know. I think that's a good place to end though. If you have anything that you want to promote or you want to promote your socials or anything, now is the time to do so before we get out of here.
I am on Twitter, but I'm not really very active. I mean, I'm on Facebook. I don't have an enormous following. You could always check me out on LinkedIn, Robert Presser. You could see what I've been up to over there. I'm a huge baseball fan, in case that hasn't shown through, and I do love my Metsies. So I'm just excited to see the rest of the season, and I really hope they can persevere through the end. And look, if the Mets are the eighth team in the National League come the finish line over here, and they're in the playoffs, I'll still be watching. So as much as I complain, I'm still excited that we've got some sports back in our lives. And I just wanted to thank you, Joe, so much for having me on today. This was really a pleasure.
The invitation is always open, as I say to all of our guests that want to come back on and talk some sports. I think that's the first time anybody has ever promoted their LinkedIn on the show. So not only are you a first time guest on the show, but you've broken some grind hours history here.
Much appreciation. Much appreciation.
All right, Robert, I'm gonna let you go, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, man.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch.
On this side of the coin, jdatasports.blogspot.com. By the time you're listening to this, the Wednesday Yankee COVID in between the pinstripes will be up. Please check that out. The series is back, even in a pandemic shortened season. And of course, this podcast, if you reach this point in the pod, please like, subscribe, share with anybody who you seem fit, download the podcast. And big thanks to Robert for coming on, first time guest, and I think he's going to be a long timer. He's, again, one of the smartest people that I know about sports, and it's always a good conversation with him. So follow him on LinkedIn. Again, that's Grind Hours History. I can't believe that he promoted his LinkedIn. But have a good weekend, and until next time, it's closing time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Peace.